Advice or wisdom? Is there a difference? Do you know? Silly kitty cat. Oh, what was I asking you? Number one, is there a difference? And if there is, do you know what the difference is? Well, let's explore that together on this edition of Hanging Out with Popsie Guy and Faith, my very talkative kitty cat. She comes out at 1 o'clock our time and says, "Guess what? It's time for me to have some cookies." And then when I give her the cookies, she says, "Guess what? Now it's time for me to bother you." But she doesn't bother me. She's a sweetie. And typically I'm not a cat guy, but this cat showed up. It was 10 years ago on my front door. It really wasn't on my front door. Here's a funny story for you. We were living in East Tennessee at the time, and I had an office in the downstairs of our little condo. And I happened to be looking out the window, as I am right now, and the drive in front of my house kind of went up and around a corner. And I look up and I see this cat just laying in the middle of the corner, right as you come around the corner and go downhill. So should be completely blindsided by any car that came. She wouldn't be able to see it, but she's wriggling her back and enjoying the sunshine, and couldn't have been more than less than a year old. So I thought, what I need to do is go up there and save that cat's life. Well, that cat ended up saving my life because I went up, told her to shoo. She followed me right down, clung onto the screen of the window, and the rest of the story is she's been with us through 4 different moves. Anyway, that's not what I wanted to talk about, but yes, is there a difference between wisdom and advice? It depends on who you ask. If you go into Google and say, "Please tell me the difference between wisdom and advice," Google's going to tell you, here's my opinion on whether there's a difference between wisdom and advice. I could share with you something in my experience. That's where wisdom comes from, is experience. I grew up in an era where if you gave your advice, it was more of an opinion. And I also remember hearing many people much older than me at the time saying that, guess what? Opinions are like armpits. Everyone has one and they stink. So giving opinion kind of, in my opinion, again, this is interesting that I use that word twice, is advice, where wisdom is perspective. Let me share with you what I mean. If you grew up in the era that I grew up, I'm 62 years old. Things were a lot different, as you well know. We parented different. We were parented differently. When you asked advice, you usually asked it from your friends. And what did they know? They were just as silly as you were. But you asked it because you were pretty sure that they would give you the advice you were looking for. Very rarely did you, I'm not saying that you didn't do it, but did somebody go to their parents for advice for the simple fact that they knew that the advice would not be what they were looking for. But as we grow older and we go through these different stages in life, what I've realized is perspective is the lens in which you see things through. And that comes with experience, and I certainly believe that wisdom also comes from experience. I think advice can be summed, and this is not Google, this is Popsie Guy saying this, summed up by, you give me the facts of the situation, you let me know what's happening, and I'll put it through my mental calculator and tell you what I think you should do in that situation and what the outcome may be, and go ahead and do it and let me know how you made out. Where I think wisdom can certainly be a portion of that, but I think wisdom entails storytelling, where advice says, maybe you should do this in this situation. My wife and I, we've been married a long time now, going on 39 years, and we've raised 2 adult children, and they're great kids, and they've got kids of their own. They're millennials. And what we've noticed as grandparents is, we may have done things a little bit differently than they do them, but they certainly are not coming out and asking for our advice. And it's something my wife and I have talked about over and again, which is we don't give advice unless we're asked. So it becomes solicited versus unsolicited. And you're probably going to be surprised to hear this, depending on where you are in your life journey. If you're a grandparent or a parent of millennials who are trying to figure out their way in the world still in their early 30s, They never ask. They just do. I said this in a previous video. It reminds me a lot of my personality, which is ready, fire, aim. So the temptation to give advice is always there, but we have to remember that unless they ask for it, it's just an opinion. And when I was growing up, there was no such thing as Google. I couldn't Google advice versus wisdom, or I couldn't Google the things that we all can do, not just these kids, which is a saying I really try to avoid. But we all go to Google. What does Google have to say? And now with ChatGPT, it's going to tell you what you think it should say. However, wisdom to me again comes from perspective, and perspective is the lens by which you see things, and the lens is shaped by your view of your own experiences. So what I've found is that although we're not asked for our advice as we think we may have, or I don't want to say have the right to, but it's like I want to tell them what I think. There are times when we can dispense wisdom in a story and say, I remember going through a time in my life, ... and it may just mirror the time that, the person that you're speaking to is going through. And you build a story around that. You don't say, this is what you need to do, Sonny. This is what I've learned through this experience is this. It may be different for you, but this is what happened with me. So wisdom, I think, is a more gentle way to express what you're thinking and how you feel about a certain subject. I think advice, and I was an advisor. Something you need to know about me, I was a financial advisor for almost 20 years. I've owned my own businesses. I was an entrepreneur. I'm not talking great big businesses with multi-millions. My wife and I both owned our own little small businesses. And I was always looking for advice on how to grow my business. What I found is, as I was maturing in the profession, I would seek out those who had been there for a long time. At the time, the gray-haired guys, kind of like me, and say, what did you do? How did you do it? And they didn't sit down and break out a spreadsheet and say, okay, in year one, this is what your cash flow needs to look like. This is where your investments need to be, yada, yada, yada. They said, well, let me tell you a story. And then they would bring me back to the time I was at in their career, and I could see myself in that situation. And they never said, this is what you need to do. They said, let me show you or share with you what worked for me at that time. So, using wisdom versus advice comes with wisdom. An example of a lens that you see the world through is, I'm a Christian. I'm not afraid to say that. I'm a born-again believer. It's going on 11 years in my relationship with Jesus. And I love the Bible. I absolutely love the Bible. And what I'm learning over the years is that there's two ways to look at the world. And one way is looking at through what I call is a biblical worldview. What does the Bible say about this? And then there's the other worldview, which I live most of my life, 3/4 of my life up to this point, with a worldly worldview. What does the world think about it? Or a secular worldview. And again, because I am who I am, it took me a long time to realize that this secular worldview is hard. It's hard because it changes so often. But because I love the Bible and I read the Bible and I understand the consistency in the Bible, I can look at it and say the world is continually changing, but God never changes. And so in dispensing wisdom, there are times when I will just rely on what the Scripture has to say about a certain subject and use that, and really try to avoid that fleshly desire to give my advice, which is, I wouldn't do it that way. This is the way I'd do it. And if you've ever done that, raise your hand. I see you. Sometimes it upsets people. It turns them off. It angers them. For two reasons. One is it's not what they wanted to hear, and number two is they don't care. They really don't care. And I'm going to make a whole video on that probably in the next few days about people don't care about you. That's the harsh reality. Now, they don't dislike you. They don't wake up in the middle of the night and say, I don't like that person. The reason I say they don't care, and this is something I when our kids were young, I said, don't worry about what people think about you. And in the early teens, if you've raised kids in their early teens, even today, kids are so worried about what other people think of them. And I had to kind of throw some cold water on it and say, people don't think about you. They just don't. Who do they think about? They think about themselves. So once an early teen person can grasp that and realize they are the same, they're not always thinking about other people, they're thinking about themselves. That's just the selfish nature of human beings. It takes a huge weight off what you perceive other people are thinking. They're not thinking about you. And that's when I say people don't care. It's not callously. They don't care if you die in a car accident or have $1 million. Well, they may care if you have $1 million, but they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about other people. So where do I want to go from here? I want to just share with you real quick that if you're in my age group, as I said, I'm 62 years old. Having been a professional advisor where my job was to give advice, the advice was based on circumstances. The advice was based on facts. The advice was based on tangible things where you could actually run it through a formula and say, I advise you to do this in this situation or do not do that in that situation. But wisdom is completely different. Wisdom is using your perspective, your life experiences, having the ability to put somebody in the story without directly telling them what to do, and hopefully helping them figure it out, or at least hoping and praying that they can figure it out to benefit themselves. So I just want to spend a little time with you on that. That's been something that's been on my mind. I'm not sure whether or not it's even something you've ever given any thought to. Drop me a note in comments and let me know. This channel is designed to help people in my age group, which is the very late boomers, continue to enjoy life. And I'll give you a little bit more detail about who I am and what we do here. But I'm so thankful that you hung out with Popsie Guy, that you took a little bit of time to digest that. And if you think I'm full of cookies, then let me know. But if you learned a little bit of something about it and you think this channel has some value, man, I need to know that too. I'm going to keep doing it. You don't have to watch, but I would love to build a group of folks, a community that I can learn from, because that's really what it's all about. So I thank you for taking the time. If you got through this whole thing, bless you. But until we meet again, this is Hanging Out with Popsie Guy, signing off.